Well, good morning, everybody. To start us off today, I'm going to show you a surface temperature map from about 7 o'clock this morning here Central Time. I'm actually down here in Texas. I flew into Houston last night. I'm a College Station, and tonight I'll be in Bozeman, Montana. So I'm going to be able to experience kind of the full range of temperatures across the lower 48. And I bring that up just to illustrate that it is this very strong temperature contrast across the lower 48 that is ultimately driving the jet stream behavior in our local environment. Of course, we have both upwind and downwind things to consider, like what's going on with the retracted Pacific jet, the ridging that's happening kind of in the Gulf of Alaska, and then of course on the downstream side of it, what we expect to see over Greenland. But this is ultimately what is driving the pattern, and you can see right here, let's go back to that, what's happening with these winds. So this is the sunrise this morning, but can I take you back to yesterday? So we can see kind of some neat cloud features like some dense fog into this area, but I want you to watch the movement of the clouds. You're going to see three things. Flow coming through like this, flow coming over the Rocky Mountains like that, and then you'll also notice this kind of circulation like this. We're going to see the top half of it, the northern half of it in this area. So as I just play this forward, can you see it? As we go into the infrared, those three different components to the flow, that's what we're keeping a very close eye on. Now, I would love to see throughout winter the better development of a subtropical portion of the jet stream, especially hitting, California into the southwest and then ejecting into the plains. If we could get that back into the flow, which is difficult with La Nina, but if we could, that would really increase the chances of getting better precipitation here. But just watch this flow overnight again. And this morning we wake up and we're seeing quite a bit of rainfall here and snow that's pushing into the northern tier. But before I cover that, I have to point out what's going on just off of the image here. There is a large tropical system, there's a large cyclone, a big low pressure system that is right now sitting out over the middle of the Atlantic. And by the time we get toward the end of this week, it's going to be a monster sitting out there, a very, very large low. And the projections are for this low to meander to the north. We will have a second system in the Siberian Peninsula here, but at this point, this system is not on a direct path for Europe. But it's a part of the blocking pattern that is currently setting up way in the high latitudes. I'm talking about over the Arctic and over Greenland right now. Because if we look at that same time period, here's the large ridge that's to the north and the low to the south. This low will get pulled in this direction. So later this week, we're going to watch for that monster system. It will produce very, very large wave and wind field across the Atlantic. That could certainly affect shipping routes across the Atlantic as they try to avoid that massive storm system. But coming back to the United States, if I just had to stitch together the main ideas I'm thinking about, we're going to start off with who's had and who has not had recent moisture. So I got two maps. The one on the left shows the last 30 days, percent of normal precipitation, and then on the right shows the current NASA soil moisture data down to 16 inches. And over here in the central and eastern Corn Belt to the mid-south, this is an area that's going to largely see some big corrections on this. But the dryness that we continue to see throughout the high plains, the central plains, the hard red winter wheat belt will likely continue given the trajectory of these next few systems. So let's distill it down into a few maps, then we'll get into the details. Overall, the very cold air across the northern Canadian prairie is because it's so cold, there's very little moisture in it. So the likelihood of there not being much in the way of precipitation here is high. We see that due to the storm track, we're going to extend the rain shadow into the high plains over the next 10 days. And that's where we also have very higher probabilities of having very little precipitation. Same thing down here from Southern California into Mexico. Florida down to the Cuba and the greater Antilles sitting under the large subtropical ridge. That's why it's drier. So we do the inverse of this, and now we say, well, where are those regions that are going to be wet? Probability being greater than an inch of total precip. About the big thing I can say in the trend in this is we've expanded this a bit farther to the north here into parts of the upper Midwest, but clearly the wettest regions are going to be from the Red River Valley of the south through the Tennessee and Ohio Valley over toward the mid-Atlantic. Okay, from there, I want to go into the high-res NAM model this morning. Let's play this one forward. So you can actually see those same pieces we saw on the satellite, 1, 2, and 3. So throughout the day today, snow is going to be spreading from Montana right through the Red River Valley of the north into northern Minnesota, light snow into this area. We see snow coming over the Four Corner states, and then this kind of stream of moisture in through here that is really just sitting on a frontal boundary, but it's being reinforced by the larger ridge kind of spinning around it over parts of the southeast. So into Wednesday morning through midday Wednesday, playing out there until Wednesday night, we're watching the development of the first central United States storm system out of this pattern. You can see it emerging here Thursday morning and spinning up over parts of Oklahoma into Kansas and Missouri. So there'll be some chilly rain that spreads out ahead of this. Potential for some ice due to overrunning. That's where we have the kind of what we call the warm conveyor belt going over the top of the colder air that's cutting underneath this. So there's the risk of some ice in this area and then potentially snow on the backside. Now, while this is taking shape coming into the northwest, we still have that what we call the negative P&A pattern. That's more troughs along the west coast. And the next system is starting to come here at this point. You can see that negative P&A late this week right here with this deeper trough. And we keep delivering systems into the Pacific Northwest out of the Gulf of Alaska. So each system, while not strong, continues to build up snowpack and deliver moisture to the west. And while this pattern looks like this, which I think it'll look like this for most of the next 7 to 10 days, we're going to keep seeing systems coming in to the northwest like this. So to answer that to look into that question, I want to show you the GFS on the left versus the European on the right. We're just going to pick up where the NAM model left off. So Thursday, here's the low we're keeping an eye on. The models have a little bit different solution on where that snow is going to be here by Thursday night, going now into early Friday morning, and then Friday about 6 a.m. See how the European model is more aggressive on the snow from Nebraska, clipping parts of South Dakota, hitting northern Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. The GFS doesn't quite resolve the same features. Going forward into Friday midday, Friday evening, it spreads more snow, the European that is, spreads more snow into southern Michigan. And then that system kind of collapses over the mid-Atlantic. Now in both models, the next low comes into the northwest late this week into the weekend. And it's going to put quite a bit of snow in the Cascades, the Klamath Mountains, the Sierra Nevada, and start to pile this up in the northern Rockies as well. Now that larger low that's forming there will have a system out ahead of it that spreads some rain over parts of the mid-south, lower Mississippi River Valley, and southeast. But what we're going to be watching very carefully is as that low ejects next Sunday night into Monday morning, the models are not in agreement on where its position is going to be. The European here is a bit farther north, with much more snow along the front range of the mountains, clear from Colorado up to Montana, and then spreading into South Dakota. But you notice that the GFS is a bit farther to the south, and it spreads a much more narrow corridor of extremely heavy snow right into here. Now remember, this is more than a week out, but we'll just keep watching it together. That's why we do this. So that low could be potentially a big snowmaker for parts of the northern plains. It's in both models, but you can see the difference in the placing and timing of this next system early next week. Okay. Now from here, let's just look at the next 7 days and kind of put a number on total precipitation. This is from the WPC this morning. Heaviest rains are going to be right in through this quarter, but you notice I got this outlined at 1.5 inches. That's a broad area that could potentially be wet in the midsection of the country. Notice how we continue to see the drier in the high plains, but with each of those systems coming out of the northwest into the northwest, we see the wettest conditions along the coast here. Now, in terms of snow, I still am not comfortable showing you operational model runs. So we're going to look at this in terms of probability. So remember, the west just keeps getting it from the northwest here. But what we've got is one system that could deliver snow here late this week and a second one that brings in more after that. So this is the probability of at least 3 inches of snow. Here's the probability of 6 inches of snow, and here's the probability of a foot. So now we can see the Cascades, the Klamath Mountains, the Northern Rockies, and the Sierra having their best chances. Now, into week 2, we might fully see the effect of that blocked pattern that's trying to set up here in the North Atlantic. Because by December 16th, going through the 17th, 18th, and 19th, we see these continual deeper troughs setting up in this area. Now, because of that, the models are going to show drier in the northwest and a little bit drier here into the plains. That's simply because the flow is coming in like this, and that's not, well, there's a lot of convergence in that flow right in through here. But we're going to see systems coming out of the Mid-South through the Ohio River Valley, and that's why the week 2 forecast seen over here is much wetter in this region, but drier over here. But I made a comment this morning that I think it's a bit biased too dry at this point. So you got week 1 versus week 2 shown on this particular panel. Okay, let's finish this up by talking about temperatures, then we'll talk about South America and get right into the long range. Here's today's high temperatures. The presence of that southeastern ridge And the fact that the PNA stays negative, in other words, troughs keep diving into the west, means that we see limited chances of bringing the colder air out of the Canadian prairie through the northern plains into the Midwest or the east or even down toward the Gulf Coast. As you see, by Friday, the coldest air just seems to stay anchored west, and we can't seem to deliver sustained shots of cooler air, let alone colder air, into the eastern half of the country. Again, that was one of the areas we talked about in the first few videos of this week as something that I kind of struggled diagnosing last week. So this is the current changes. Now, to show you the new week 1 versus week 2 temperature anomalies, the most important trend we saw was that even out there into week 2, December 13th through 19th, the models kind of went a little bit more limited on the delivering of this cold air to the east. So I wrote on here, trended less cold. And I think that largely has to do with the Pacific jet stream behavior and the upstream blocking. We just can't seem to shed the effect of those two things to allow this colder air to really move. You see, the issue is that even though there's a trough here, it's not truly connected to deep cold air. And it's a bit surprising because the polar vortex wants to split here, but we don't seem to see a connection between it and this trough that's over the central United States. Should that connection develop, we could see major changes in temperature. But right now, I don't have a lot of evidence to support that that's going to happen, okay? So to finish this up, I want to show you what's going on in South America. Now, you notice there's some drier conditions over here in Mato Grosso and into Rondônia. Over the next 2 weeks, we're still looking at 3+ inches of rain here. Eastern Brazil's very wet. Even southern Brazil, with its drier bias, there's still going to be decent rainfall for this soybean crop and early corn crop, plus other stuff that's grown here. The risks are in Argentina, where even though there are some weekend storms that are going to come through here, it's going to be hot this week, continued hot, and then after those storms come through Argentina this weekend, I see drier conditions emerging once again. Okay, if you get a chance to read today's report, we take a look at the new long-range projections for La Nina. We also diagnose what the new model runs from the ECMWF mean. I'll continue to analyze this and put it in future reports, but this is the latest thinking based upon the European model, which I'll be honest is heavily biased toward keeping La Nina around. Why? It was initialized with a strong La Nina, so it's going to continue that in the forecast. That's how models work. So we'll keep you posted, and I'll watch for when this might start to shift around. Until then, have a good rest of your week, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow morning from Montana, where it will be significantly colder than where I am today. Have a good one. Thanks.